So this video is focusing on some Spectrum Next basics, and this part is going to be about the browser. The browser has evolved significantly since the days of the Spectrum Plus 3E ROM, on which the NextZXOS is based. And it's come on in leaps and bounds since the last official Spectrum Next distribution. I'm talking about the one which was created about 2 years ago. We have had 2 new updates since then. So if you've not already updated to that, you need to head on over to specnext.com/latest distro, and I'll put the link in the description. The update itself works on the Spectrum Next and the NGO, and there is documentation available on the Spectrum Next itself in the form of guides, which describes how to use all of the features available. But maybe some people don't like to read instructions, or maybe it's enough for them just to know how to move up, down, back and forth through the file system and load files. So this video is just a really basic guide to the NextZXOS browser. So the browser is divided into 4 main sections, and at the top of the screen we can see the current drive, and below that we have some viewing options. The main panel below this is displaying files and folders present on the currently selected drive. Then we have the black bar with the Sinclair Rainbow on, and this section contains more options to filter and show additional data on the files. And finally below this we're presented with shortcut keys to perform file system operations. So for the purposes of this video, I'm using a freshly formatted SD card. I've copied the latest distribution to it, and I've copied some game files over as well, TAP, TZX, and some native Next software is in there too. I'd always recommend not using the existing folder names that come with the distribution when you're copying your own files to the SD card, so that the data you copy to the SD card, you can easily identify it, you can easily keep it separate for when you're updating to future distributions. Your folder names will be different, so nothing will get overwritten. So as you can see here, I have classic Spectrum games in a folder called Classic. We've got some different formats of games in here. Okay. I also have some Next stuff in the folder called Current. I've also got some mod, SID and SNDH files in a folder called Music. So onto the browser. In older versions of NextZXOS, the browser displayed files in the order that they were written to SD card, and this meant that files would go out of order very quickly when being displayed in the browser, and often people resorted to using fat sorting software on a PC or Mac in order to get files into alphabetical order. So NextZXOS now sorts files and folders before presenting them to the user, and the default setting is to sort by name and in ascending order. And we can change the ordering of files and folders within the current view by pressing the O key. Pressing this cycles through the ordering of files by size, date, or no sorting at all. And we can also change the sort order from ascending to descending by pressing symbol shift and K, which is the plus key, and back to ascending by pressing symbol shift and J, which is the minus key. So as you can see here, O changes order to size, O again changes to order by date, order by none, and then back to order by name. And then, as mentioned, the symbol shift and K key gives us plus and minus, and we can just flick back and forth between the order in which we want those results presented. Next to that, we have the mix option, and this allows you to choose how files and folders are presented in the view. So when mix is on, files and folders are sorted together, mixed in other words, in the browser display, and in this case by name. Pressing X to switch off mix will sort the folders first and then the files, so it keeps the files and folder sorting separate. So mix X, as we can see here now, all of the folders have been sorted first, and then we have all the files at the end. pressing X again, you get that mixed view of both files and folders. Now, search allows you to search for files within the current folder, and this can be useful when you've got a folder with lots of different files in there. Just browse to the required folder and press H for search, and as you start to type, NextZXOS begins to highlight the first file it finds that matches the pattern you've typed. So here I have a folder called mess, which is just a bunch of random files I've thrown in there. We've got tap, ZAT, TRD, DSK, TZX, fairly hellish if that's how organized you are. And if I want to search for Valhalla, I just start typing. So I press H in here to search, and then I start typing Valhalla. And as you can see, as I type additional letters, it will then start to home in on the file I'm interested in. Okay, to get rid of the search, just get rid of that, press enter, and it will return to showing you everything. Now you'll see to the right of search is name, and what name does is it will present you with the full file name in cases where you see the tilde symbol within the file name itself. So I've got a few of those here actually. So if I press N, so I've got to select a file first, and then that will give me the full file name. There you go. The area option I'm not going to go into in this demo because area relates to the current user area being displayed, and it's only applicable to +3 DOS formatted drives and mounted +3 disks. And finally, the last thing at the top of the browser is info, and pressing I lets you cycle through displaying file sizes, date timestamps, file attributes, or nothing at all. So if I press info, you can see here that instead of showing me what it was showing me, it's cycling through file sizes, dates, times, and attributes, or none. So below the main browser window, we have some additional viewing options for files and folders. Filter lets us filter the files and folders presented in the browser by file name or extension, or a combination of both. And if we stick with this mess folder, and if I wanted to search for all tap files, I'd press F to filter, and then I would enter, say, star.tap. And there we go. Now I've got all the tap files. There's no real replacement though for kind of naming things and organizing things accordingly. The thing to bear in mind as well when you've got a filter applied is that filter is persistent, as you can see here. And so if you're searching for things and not finding them, then you may still have a filter applied. So the best way to get rid of the filter is to press F again, press enter, basically not filtering anything, and then you're back to where you were. Now there are a couple more options here that you can see to the right of filter. We have S, and pressing S will either show or hide system files. When it's highlighted, obviously it will show system files. When it's not highlighted, it won't. And dot will show you the dot and dot dot directories that you can use for navigation. I switch off the dot and those two directories have disappeared. I press dot again and they're back, and you can use that obviously to navigate up a level, etc. And then we have the braces key, which is to the right of the dot. And what the braces key is, it allows you to show metadata on the file. And metadata is something that I'll come to, but you get to that with symbol shift and F. And you can see that is now switched on. Press it again, symbol shift and F, and it's now switched off. Now a good question is, how many files should you have within a particular folder? And the answer is more down to how quickly the NextZXOS can render that folder. So if we come down here to my test folder, you can see here that we have folders with different numbers of files in, and I will show you briefly how quickly it takes. Now, The main load on this is the number of files. It's not really a problem in terms of NextZXOS sorting them into a particular order. Most of the time it's taken by loading the actual files in. So where you have 100 files, you can see it's pretty instantaneous. Where you have 200 files, it's not too bad. If you come up to 500 files, you can see it's still taking about a second maybe. And then 600 files, maybe that's a bit too painful. So I kind of keep it below about 200, 300 files, which loads acceptably. And then of course, if we want to order by things other than name, we have to wait for that amount of time. I think that's perfectly acceptable. Now, two of my favorite features of NextZXOS I'm about to demonstrate here. So if I want to go to classic games, and I'm going to go finding something like Manic Miner, the old classic Manic Miner, of which there's lots of different versions here, isn't there? But obviously this is the original one. And it's about how NextZXOS remembers your load settings for software. So if I go into Manic Miner, I get presented with a whole bunch of options. More than just are presented here as well, because you've also got the advanced hardware options that you can go into and look at stuff. But most games will work with some of the more basic settings. So in Manic Miner terms, I'd start it in 48K mode. I might look to see, wait at the loading screen. I don't want tape loading simulation on. And I'm not going to load it via the Pi, so I'm just going to press 4 to launch it in 48K mode. And there we go, there's Manic Miner loaded, and I'm really bad at it. Well, I didn't used to be. So of course, if we reset that now, and I go to load Manic Miner again, it doesn't take me to the options screen anymore. NextZXOS has remembered my preferences, and the idea is, I guess, you work through all of the games that you like the most, you set your load preferences once, and then NextZXOS remembers those settings and you don't have to worry about them anymore. But the question is, how does that work? And it works in one of two ways. Now, by default, Manic Miner will just load using the settings I chose. If I want to override those settings and revisit that screen again, I hold down symbol shift and press enter on Manic Miner, and then that will take me back to being able to define these settings again, should I want to change anything, or if I've set some settings up that means that the game doesn't actually load properly, it takes me back into this screen. Now there's an important setting in here, and it's under options, and it's options saved to cache. Now that is the default for NextZXOS. It's going to save your loading options to a cache, and if we press O, it will change that behavior to save the options to the file name. And it's important to understand the differences between the two, because depending on your situation, one may be preferable to the other. But by default, what's going to happen here is NextZXOS is going to save a file to another folder, and that file is going to contain all of your loading preferences. And we can view that file, because we do have one for Manic Miner. Just come out of this. And we want to go up to the NextZXOS folder, and then there's a folder in here called metadata. And what we'll see here is a C drive that represents my C drive, and there will be a relative path in here, classic, tap, M. So this is basically replicating the folder structure that took me to Manic Miner. And so whenever a game is being launched, it's going to check in here to see whether there's a corresponding file that contains the loading information for that particular game. So come out of here. and back into Classic. Now, if I wanted to do something, let's say with Scuba Dive, another classic game. If I've actually got, yeah, there it is, Scuba Dive. And I want to load Scuba Dive. It's going to take me to the load preferences. And this time I'm going to say option save to file name. I'm going to see what happens with that. And I'm going to launch it in 48K mode by pressing 4. So the behavior is slightly different now, and I'll show you exactly what happens. So game is loaded. I'm now going to quit out of that and go back in. Now, as you can see, Scuba Dive, nothing has really changed. The file is still called Scuba Dive, although we have saved our loading preferences into the file name. Now, as before, I mentioned the option next to dot, which is the braces, and we get to the braces with symbol shift and F, and look what happens when I press symbol shift and F. So I'm going to just find Scuba Dive again, and there you can see that something has been added in braces to the file name. And if I want to see the full file name, I will press N for name, as you remember from before. And you can see there's all of the load preferences are stored in that hex key. So that file name has actually changed physically on the SD card. But NextZXOS by default won't actually bother reading what's in the braces. And of course I can switch off the brace by pressing symbol shift and F, and now things will have returned to normal. Scuba Dive. Now, of course, there are pros and cons to this, because if you're affecting the file name of everything that you play, then those files may not be appropriate if you then use the same tap files on a div-MMC, for example, on an original Spectrum. Those file names will have been changed. The other thing to consider is, even though you've selected to save to the file name, it is still going to save to cache. So if we just go back into NextZXOS, we're going to find a relative path within the metadata folder pointing to Scuba Dive. So within Classic, tab, we had that path leading to Manic Miner, and now we've got this S, which is leading us to Scuba Dive, and there is the metadata. Okay, so you can save to either or. My preference is to save to cache, but what you've got to bear in mind saving to cache is that you don't go modifying your TAP files, Z80 files, whatever, externally on a PC, and that you modify them within NextZXOS. Because if I want to start going in and renaming stuff on a PC, then the cache will become obsolete. The cache file won't match the relative path to the actual file, and that's going to be a problem. Whereas if you do your renaming within NextZXOS itself, it will check for the presence of a cache file, for example. But of course, if I start stripping out the metadata within the file name, then you're going to lose that, but you're still going to have it in the cache. So if I just go to Scuba Dive again, keep missing it. Okay, so firstly, if I was to rename Scuba Dive, pressing R, and I just want to take out, say, this extra metadata. Okay, so the metadata has now gone. Okay, that has now been saved. Now if I throw the braces in, Scuba Dive doesn't have anything. Take the braces off again. Now what will have happened to the metadata? So if I go and look at NextZXOS, have a look at the metadata folder, classic, tap S for scuba dive, and you'll see there the metadata file has actually updated with the new name. And similarly, if I go back to classic, find scuba dive, and just load it, it hasn't taken me to the preferences, therefore it has found that metadata cache file. So the metadata cache folder is quite important, and of course it lives within the NextZXOS folder, and that's one of the folders that you will be updating when you update the distro. So you need to be very mindful that if you're saving a lot of your preferences for lots of games, then you need to preserve that folder, which brings us on to the point of backing up your SD card regularly. Just stick it in your PC or Mac and copy the entire contents to a folder on your PC or Mac, just in case you get into difficulty when you're updating the distro and you drag a folder over and it wipes everything of yours out. You don't want that to happen. Now, I mentioned two things that I really like, or two of my favourite things about NextZXOS. And the next thing is links. Now, if like me, you have thousands of games and they're all dotted around different folders, you may have this whole A to Z kind of thing going on. You may have a folder for all of your Next stuff, but you want a way of being able to easily access it all in the same place. And one of the great features is links. Now, links are like shortcuts, effectively. They allow you to put links to certain games so that you can easily find them in future in one location. So an example of links, if I go back to, say, Classic, and we'll do Manic Miner again. Where are you, Manic Miner? There you are, Manic Miner. Okay, so there are additional options at the bottom which you can't actually see, but you can see the option extend equals more. If I press extend mode, then I get some additional options at the bottom, and one of those options is make link. So if I press L, this will make a link to Manic Miner, and I'll show you where that comes out in a minute. Let's just go and add in Scuba Dive. Okay, so it's extend mode and L to make a link. And I'm also going to look for Valhalla. Okay, Valhalla, extend mode, L to make a link. And I'm also going to pick a next game as well. So in the current folder, let's do Baggers in Space. Select the next file, extend mode, and L makes a link. Okay, so I return to the main menu. I go into browser, and I can press L for links. And you'll also see that a folder is being created called links, where you can see the files I've just selected. So if I press L from anywhere, it's going to take me to this page here. And this is an easy way, really, of, I guess, refining your collection of thousands and bringing to the fore the titles that you like the most in one place. And I can rename the links as much as I want, as long as I don't take LNK off the end, because NextZXOS is set up to pick up on the LNK file itself. So if I want to load Scuba Dive, I just select it. So it's a real good way of having your favourites, I guess, all in one place, but able to just press L from anywhere and get to where you want to be. And if you have lots of favourites, then you can create folders, for example, to store the links in. Once a link is created, you can move it. I can press K to make a directory, and I could make a directory called next. I could then say pick up baggers in space. With a V I can move it, yes to move. I change to the destination, I go into the next folder, and then I press P, move here, yes. And I can paste it as, I could just have baggersinspace.lnk if I wanted. So now I've got a next folder, and I could make another directory with K. I could call it classic, and then I could start moving, say, Manic Miner into the classic folder, paste as, take that out and just have the LNK. And then the same again with Scuba Dive, move this into classic, paste yes, paste it as that. It's something that I guess you build up over time. Move Valhalla as well, move, yep. Stick it in classic, paste, yes. So again, this links folder becomes important, especially if you spent a lot of time curating it. So from anywhere now, I can go into here, I'd see all my next games that I like playing the most, I'll see all my classic games without having to go and pick them out of folders manually and sticking them in a new folder. They can all live in their existing locations quite happily.